The crystal chandeliers of the Oriental Hotel ballroom cast golden light over 400 guests dressed in their finest aso ebi. But nobody was watching the bride and groom anymore. Every eye in that Lagos wedding reception had turned to watch a heavily pregnant woman in a stained housemaid uniform carrying a tray of small chops. Her swollen feet squeezed into worn rubber slippers, her face wet with tears she was trying desperately to hide. That woman was Chioma Okafor, and 3 hours ago, she had been the legal wife of the groom currently slow dancing with his new bride at the center of the room. The man spinning his mistress around under those glittering lights was her husband, Emeka Okafor, and he had planned this humiliation down to the last cruel detail. He wanted everyone to see what happened to women who refused to disappear quietly when they were no longer wanted. He wanted Chioma to serve the guests at his wedding to another woman while 7 months pregnant with his child, to hand out drinks and appetizers to people who had attended their own wedding just 2 years before, to be a living, breathing reminder that he had the power to destroy her and she could do nothing about it. But what Emeka didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have imagined as he smiled and accepted congratulations from guests who pretended not to see his pregnant wife working as help, was that this moment of absolute degradation would become the fuel for something he should have feared. 5 years from now, he would be standing in front of that same hotel, but this time he wouldn't be walking in as a groom. He would be walking out in handcuffs, his business empire in ruins, his reputation destroyed, his freedom gone, all because of the woman he had tried to erase. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to when Chioma Okafor was still naive enough to believe that love and sacrifice meant something. Where are you watching from? Lagos, London, maybe New York, or Johannesburg? Drop a comment below because this story is going to shake you, and I want to know where in the world people still believe in justice. 3 years before that wedding, before the betrayal, before the humiliation, Chioma was a 24-year-old corper posted to Lagos for her national youth service. She had just graduated from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, with a degree in computer science, first-class honors, top of her department, the pride of her widowed mother back in their small village in Enugu State. Chioma was brilliant, everyone said so, with that kind of sharp intelligence that made lecturers remember her name and classmates ask her for help. She was also beautiful in a quiet way, with dark skin that glowed like polished mahogany, eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense, and a smile that came slowly but lit up her entire face when it finally arrived. She wasn't the type of girl who drew attention in a crowd. She was too reserved for that, too careful, too aware of how hard her mother had worked selling vegetables in the market to pay her school fees. Chioma knew the value of everything because she had grown up with nothing, sharing a single room with her mother and 2 younger brothers, studying by candlelight when NEPA took the power, wearing second-hand uniforms to school, eating once a day sometimes so her brothers could eat twice. When she got that first-class degree, when she walked across that stage and collected her certificate, her mother had cried tears that seemed to wash away years of struggle. "This is it," her mother had whispered, holding Chioma's face in her work-roughened hands. "This is why we suffered. Now you will have a better life. You will marry well. You will never know the kind of poverty we knew." Chioma had believed her. She had believed that education was the ladder out of poverty, that hard work would be rewarded, that goodness would be recognized. She had been so beautifully, tragically wrong. Her NYSC posting to Lagos felt like Providence. The big city, opportunities everywhere, a chance to build something real. She was posted to a small tech startup in Lekki, a company called DigiWave Solutions that was trying to compete with the bigger players in Nigeria's growing tech scene. The office was cramped, just 6 employees including the founder, but there was energy there, ambition, that electric feeling of people building something from nothing. The founder was Emeka Okafor. He was 29 then, tall and handsome with skin the color of dark chocolate, a fade so sharp it could cut glass, and a smile that made you want to trust him even when your instincts whispered caution. He dressed well, Always in fitted shirts and designer jeans, smelled like expensive cologne, drove a fairly used Mercedes that he kept immaculately clean. He had that Lagos hustle energy, always on his phone making deals, always talking about the next big thing, always 5 steps ahead in his mind. When Chioma walked into DigiWave Solutions for her first day, Emeka had looked up from his laptop and something had shifted in the room. Not love at first sight, nothing that dramatic, but recognition maybe. The sense of two people who came from the same kind of nothing and were hungry for the same kind of something. "Where are you from?" Emeka had asked after introducing himself. "Enugu," Chioma had replied. "Nsuka." Emeka's face had broken into a genuine smile. "My father's people are from Enugu. Udi local government, we're practically neighbors." That shared connection, that Igbo solidarity in the chaos of Lagos, had been the beginning. Emeka had taken her under his wing, taught her the systems, introduced her to clients, praised her work ethic and her intelligence. "You're not like these Lagos girls," he would say. "They want everything handed to them but you. You understand hard work." Chioma had glowed under his attention, had worked even harder to prove him right, staying late to finish projects, coming in early to prepare presentations, learning new coding languages on her own time. Within 3 months, she wasn't just the corper anymore. She was essential to the company, the one person Emeka trusted to handle the technical side while he focused on bringing in business. Within 6 months, their relationship had shifted from professional to personal. It happened gradually. Late nights at the office turning into dinner at small buka spots, work conversations bleeding into personal ones. Emeka telling her about his childhood in Surulere, how his father had been a mechanic who drank away his wages, how his mother had sold a car by the roadside to feed 6 children, how he had dropped out of university after 2 years because there was no money, how he had taught himself tech skills from YouTube videos and sheer determination. "I'm gonna be somebody," he had told Chioma one night over a plate of jollof rice and chicken at a makeshift restaurant near the office. "I'm going to build an empire. I'm going to make sure my children never know the kind of poverty I knew." And Chioma, who had her own poverty scars, who understood that hunger, that drive, had believed him. When he kissed her that night under the fluorescent lights of the bus stop where they waited for her transport back to the one room she rented in Aja, she had kissed him back, and in that moment she had allowed herself to imagine a future, someone to build with, someone who understood where she came from and where she wanted to go. They got married 6 months later, a small traditional wedding in her village, just immediate family. No white wedding because money was tight and they were focused on building the business. Chioma's mother had been cautious, had asked questions about Emeka's family, about his prospects, about why he was in such a hurry to marry. But Chioma had been 25 and in love and convinced she had found her partner, so she had dismissed her mother's concerns as old-fashioned worry. The first year of marriage had been hard, but hopeful. They lived in a one-bedroom flat in Aja, cramped and far from the office, spending 2 hours in traffic each way. But they were together, building something. Chioma had finished her service year and Emeka had hired her full-time at DigiWave, made her the chief technology officer even though the title was bigger than the salary. They worked 16-hour days, pitching to clients, building websites and apps, slowly growing their reputation. Money was tight. Some months they struggled to pay rent, but there was momentum, a sense that they were on the edge of breakthrough. Then Chioma got pregnant. She had been careful. They both had been. They couldn't afford a child yet, but contraception failed or fate intervened depending on how you looked at it, and suddenly there was a baby coming. Emeka's reaction had been strange, not quite happy, but not quite upset either. Something muted and distant that Chioma had tried not to analyze too deeply. "It's fine," he had said, squeezing her hand without quite meeting her eyes. "We'll manage. We always do." But something had shifted after that announcement. Emeka started coming home later, started taking phone calls in the other room, started being vague about meetings and trips. Chioma had been too exhausted from first trimester nausea and trying to keep the business running to pay proper attention, had attributed his distance to stress about the financial pressure of a coming child. She didn't know that Emeka had met someone else. Her name was Adaeze Nwosu, and she was everything Chioma was not. Adaeze came from money, old Lagos money. Her father owned a chain of hotels across Nigeria. Her mother sat on the board of several blue-chip companies. She herself had an MBA from London Business School and owned a PR firm in Victoria Island. She was glamorous in that Lagos big girl way, always in designer clothes, hair always freshly done, nails always perfect, the kind of woman who commanded attention when she walked into a room. She had met Emeka at a tech networking event, had been charmed by his hustle and ambition, had seen potential in him, potential that could be unlocked with the right connections, the right funding, the right last name attached to his. Adizi didn't want to be Emeka's side chick. She wanted to be his wife. But there was a problem. Emeka was already married to a village girl with no money and no connections, a girl who was now pregnant and therefore even harder to discard. So, Addis had proposed a solution: get rid of the wife. Not kill her, nothing that crude, but humiliate her so completely, degrade her so thoroughly, that she would have no choice but to disappear, to take her child, and go back to whatever village she came from and never show her face in Lagos again. Emeka had hesitated at first. Chioma was a good woman, loyal, hard-working. She had been with him when he had nothing, but then Adiz had showed him what his life could be, introduced him to her father, who had immediately seen the potential in DigiWave and offered to invest 200 million naira, 200 million that would transform his small startup into a real company. That would make him the kind of man who drove Range Rovers and lived in Banana Island, the kind of man who belonged in Adesi's world. All he had to do was make his current wife disappear. The plan had been calculated with the precision of a military operation. First, Emeka started treating Chioma differently at work, undermining her in meetings, questioning her technical decisions, making her feel incompetent and small. Then he started bringing Adiz around the office, introducing her as a consultant, someone helping them rebrand, letting everyone see how beautiful she was, how polished, how connected. The staff, all 6 of them, had watched this happening and said nothing because Emeka was the boss and they needed their jobs. Then came the night Emeka told Chioma he wanted a divorce. She had been 5 months pregnant, her belly round and prominent, her body swollen and uncomfortable. And he had looked at her across their small dining table and said, "I don't love you anymore. I want out." Chioma had thought he was joking at first, had laughed nervously, but his face had been serious, cold even. And the laugh had died in her throat. "What are you talking about?" she had whispered. "We're having a baby. We built this company together. There is no we," Emeka had interrupted. "You were my employee who I made the mistake of marrying. You have no claim to my company. I checked with lawyers, and I want you out of my life." Chioma had begged, had cried, had reminded him of everything they had built together, every late night, every sacrifice, every promise. But Emeka had been unmoved, his face set like stone, and she had realized with growing horror that this wasn't sudden. This had been planned. She was being discarded like trash. The divorce had been brutal and fast. Emeka had hired expensive lawyers, had produced documents that Chioma had signed early in their business relationship that proved she had no ownership stake in DigiWave Solutions, had frozen their joint account leaving her with nothing, had stopped paying rent on their flat so the landlord evicted her. Within 2 weeks, Chioma had gone from being a wife and CTO to being homeless and jobless, 6 months pregnant and sleeping on a friend's couch in Surulere, her whole life shattered. She had called her mother crying, had explained what happened, and her mother had said quietly, "Come home, we will manage. At least you will have the child." But Chioma had refused, had clung to some stubborn pride, some desperate hope that this was a nightmare she would wake up from, that Emeka would come to his senses, that the man she loved was still in there somewhere. Then came the wedding invitation. It arrived by courier to the address where she was staying, a glossy gold and white card with beautiful calligraphy announcing the upcoming marriage of Emeka Okafor and Adaeze Nwosu, ceremony at the Redeemed Christian Church of God, reception at the Oriental Hotel, dress code formal, #forever starts now. Chioma had stared at that invitation for a full hour, her hands shaking, unable to process that this was real, that her husband of barely 18 months was marrying another woman while she was pregnant with his child, that he had moved on so completely it was like she had never existed. Then her phone had rung, Emeka's number on the screen. She had answered, some desperate part of her hoping this was the moment he apologized, said he had made a terrible mistake, begged her to come back. Instead, Emeka had said, "I need you to do something for me." Chioma had waited, silent. "The catering company is short-staffed for the reception," Emeka had continued, his voice casual, conversational. "And I thought you could help out. You know, serve drinks, pass around small chops, that sort of thing." Chioma had been sure she misheard. "What? You heard me?" Emeka had said, and now his voice had an edge. "I'm paying you 5,000 naira for the day, which is more than you're worth, honestly. And you need the money, don't you? Since you refused to go back to your village, so show up at the Oriental at 2 p.m. on Saturday. Use the service entrance. Someone will give you a uniform." Chioma had found her voice then, rage cutting through shock. "You want me to serve at your wedding to another woman, while I'm pregnant with your child?" "Yes," Emeka had said simply. "I want everyone to see where you ended up. I want them to understand what happens when people try to hold me back, and I want you to understand that you are nothing. You were always nothing. You're just a village girl who got lucky for a minute and now luck has run out." He had hung up before Chioma could respond, and she had sat there on that couch in Surulere, 7 months pregnant, broke, humiliated, with a choice to make. She could refuse, could hold on to her dignity, but then she would have no money for food, no money for antenatal care, no money for the rapidly approaching delivery. Or she could swallow every bit of pride she had left, could put on that uniform, could endure whatever hell Emeka had planned, and at least walk away with 5,000 naira that would buy her a few more days of survival. Chioma had chosen survival. That's how she found herself at the Oriental Hotel that Saturday, entering through the service entrance as instructed, being handed a plain gray housemaid uniform by a catering supervisor who looked at her pregnant belly with pity but said nothing. The uniform was too small, stretched tight across her stomach, and the rubber slippers they gave her were a size too big. But Chioma had put them on, had tied her hair back with the scrap of cloth they provided, had picked up the tray of small chops, and had walked into that ballroom. The ceremony itself had been beautiful. Emeka in a pristine white agbada with gold embroidery. Adaeze in a wedding gown that probably cost more than Chioma had earned in her entire life. The church packed with Lagos society. Photographers everywhere capturing every perfect moment. Chioma had watched from the back, behind the catering table, invisible to everyone except the other servers, and she had felt something inside her die, whatever hope she had been clinging to finally releasing its grip. Then came the reception, and that's when Emeka's true plan revealed itself. He had specifically requested that Chioma work the VIP section, the area where his new in-laws sat, where his business associates congregated, where everyone who mattered could see her. As she moved through the crowd with her tray, people had started to recognize her, whispers spreading like wildfire. "Isn't that his first wife? Oh my God, she's pregnant. What is she doing here? This is shameful. How could he do this?" But no one said anything directly to her. No one helped. They just stared and whispered and took pictures with their phones. At one point, Adaizi's mother had called Chioma over, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You there, house girl. Bring me some champagne." Chioma had brought the champagne, had stood there while the woman examined her pregnant belly with open disgust. "Emeka told me about you," the woman had said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "How you trapped him with pregnancy. How you tried to claim his business. I'm glad he had the sense to get rid of you before you ruined his life completely. People like you need to know your place." Chioma had said nothing, had just stood there trembling while laughter rippled through the nearby guests, while camera phones captured her humiliation, while her husband danced with his new wife under those golden chandeliers. The moment that broke her, the moment that would fuel everything that came after, was when Emeka himself had walked over to where she stood, Adais on his arm, both of them glowing with champagne and victory. "Chioma," Emeka had said, his voice friendly, casual, as if they were old acquaintances catching up. "Thanks for helping out today. You're doing a great job." Then he had taken a 20 naira note from his pocket, dirty and crumpled, and had tried to hand it to her. "For your trouble," he had said, smiling that same smile that had once made her feel special. "Buy yourself something nice." Chioma had looked at that 20 naira note, had looked at Emeka's face, had looked at Adaisi smirking beside him, and something had shifted deep inside her, something fundamental and irreversible. She had not taken the money. Instead, she had looked Emeka directly in the eyes and said quietly, "I will remember this. Every second of this day I will remember, and one day you will pay for what you've done." Emeka had laughed, actually laughed, and several guests had joined in, because what could this pregnant, broke, humiliated woman possibly do to him? He was on top of the world, money pouring in from his new father-in-law, business exploding, beautiful wife, bright future. What could this village girl possibly do except fade away into irrelevance? That night, after the reception ended, after she had been given her 5,000 naira in cash by a contemptuous catering supervisor, after she had changed out of that too-small uniform and walked out of the Oriental Hotel into the Lagos night, Chioma had sat at a bus stop and made a decision. She would not go back to her village. She would not disappear quietly. She would survive. She would raise her child, and she would become something that would make Emeka regret the day he tried to destroy her. She didn't know how yet, didn't have a plan, just had fury and determination and the absolute certainty that this wasn't over. 5 years later, Emeka Okafor stood in his corner office on the 10th floor of a gleaming building on Adeola Odeku Street in Victoria Island, looking out over the Lagos skyline, and felt the first real tremor of fear he had experienced in years. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. His email was flooded with messages from panicked investors and angry partners, and his lawyer had just told him that he needed to come to the police station immediately regarding allegations of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. DigiWave Solutions, the company that was supposed to make him a tech titan, was collapsing in real time, and Emeka couldn't understand how. Everything had been perfect. The investment from his father-in-law had transformed the company. They had expanded rapidly, landed huge government contracts, become one of the most talked-about tech firms in Nigeria. But 3 months ago, things had started going wrong. First, a major client had pulled out, claiming discrepancies in billing. Then another client had done the same. Then whistleblowers had started leaking documents to journalists. Documents that showed DigiWave had been inflating costs, delivering substandard products, using pirated software while charging for licensed versions, basically running an elaborate fraud scheme that had bilked clients out of hundreds of millions of naira. Emeka had tried to contain it, had paid people to keep quiet, had threatened legal action against the journalists, but the leaks kept coming, more detailed each time, and now the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission was involved, and his father-in-law had distanced himself completely, had released a public statement saying he had been deceived, had pulled all his investment, had even started divorce proceedings on Adaizi's behalf to protect the family name. In 5 years, Emeka had gone from struggling entrepreneur to millionaire to criminal facing decades in prison, and he still didn't understand how it had all fallen apart so completely. The answer walked into his office that afternoon without knocking, without permission, with the confidence of someone who owned the space they inhabited. Emeka looked up from his desk, ready to yell at whoever had the audacity to barge in, and the words died in his throat. The woman standing in his doorway was beautiful, polished, wearing an expensive navy blue suit that fit perfectly, her hair in a sleek professional style, her face calm and composed. But there was something familiar about her, something that made Emeka's stomach clench with recognition he couldn't quite place. "Hello, Emeka," the woman said, her voice quiet but carrying power. "Do you remember me?" Emeka stared, his mind racing, trying to place her, and then it clicked. The eyes, those same eyes that had looked at him with love once, with devastation at the Oriental Hotel 5 years ago. But everything else was different. This woman was confident, successful, nothing like the broken pregnant girl he had humiliated. "Chioma?" he whispered, his voice cracking. She smiled, cold and triumphant. "Dr. Chioma Okafor. Actually, I finished my master's in computer science and cybersecurity at the University of Lagos, graduated top of my class, then did my PhD at Carnegie Mellon University in the United States. Specialized in digital forensics and fraud detection? I'm quite accomplished now." Emeka couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was seeing. "You're probably wondering how your company collapsed so spectacularly," Chioma continued, walking further into the office. "It's actually a fascinating case study in digital forensics. You see, 5 years ago, when you humiliated me at your wedding, when you tried to erase me, I made a decision. I would raise my daughter. Our daughter, by the way. Her name is Adana, and she's brilliant. I would finish my education, and I would dedicate myself to understanding exactly how you built your fraudulent empire. Because you see, Emeka, I was there at the beginning. I knew DigiWave systems intimately. I built half of them, so I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking." She paused, letting that sink in. "For 5 years, while you were living large, while you were enjoying your ill-gotten wealth, I was working, studying, documenting, gathering evidence, every fraudulent contract, every inflated invoice, every piece of pirated software you passed off as licensed, every bribe you paid, every corner you cut. I found it all, and then I packaged it beautifully and handed it to the EFCC, to your clients, to journalists, to anyone who would listen, and I watched your empire crumble exactly the way you tried to make me crumble." Emeka finally found his voice. "Why? You destroyed me? You took everything from me. Did you think there would be no consequences?" Chioma's voice was still calm, almost gentle. "Did you think you could humiliate a pregnant woman at your wedding? Could pay her 5,000 naira to serve your guests? Could offer her 20 naira like she was a beggar and she would just disappear? You underestimated me, Emeka. You thought I was nothing, just a village girl, but you forgot that same village girl was smarter than you, worked harder than you, built the systems you took credit for. I was never the problem. Your cruelty was. Your greed was. Your arrogance was." "The police are coming," Emeka said desperately. "They'll arrest me. I'll go to prison." "Yes," Chioma agreed. "You will, for a very long time, probably. And you'll lose everything, your company, your reputation, your freedom, just like I lost everything 5 years ago. Except I rebuilt, I rose, I became something better. You won't get that chance." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Emeka, our daughter Adana. She's 5 now, brilliant and beautiful. She asks about her father sometimes, and I tell her the truth. I tell her that her father was a man who chose cruelty over love, greed over family, image over integrity. I tell her so she learns what kind of man never to accept in her life. That's your legacy, not the business, not the money. Just a cautionary tale I tell my daughter about what happens to men who think women are disposable." Chioma walked out, and 3 hours later, Emeka was arrested at the Oriental Hotel, the same hotel where he had humiliated Chioma 5 years before. The EFCC had chosen the location deliberately. had made sure journalists were present to capture him being led out in handcuffs, his face twisted with shame and fear, his perfect life in ruins. And somewhere in Lagos, Dr. Chioma Okafor sat with her daughter, watching the news coverage, and felt nothing but peace. Justice wasn't always swift, but when it came, it was complete.